But 3, we've lost something.
Yeah, just do that. We should be able to do book 2, haven't we, pretty much?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think not pretty much, I think entirely, but tell me if you have questions.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. Let's play Martini.
Oh, this is the one. Danger Zone.
What are we doing?
Martini, Gavotte.
Oh, what did you teach? Teaching is at 2. Teaching points now. So just remind you that if you don't like the clicks, like I don't like the clicks, use the old accompaniments and the new really hard to listen to.
Some of the older companies got clicks as well, right?
Yeah, but that's
Got a
only
few more
very
clicks,
few.
so-
Sure, yeah.
It's just starting
Right,
off.
yeah.
Mostly they have. Oh yes. Yeah, mostly they have an introduction, I think, but then there isn't one. Okay. significant memory challenge in books 1 to 3. Even the Bach Gavotte, which is the other one that's got the same tune again and again and again, is, I think, easier to remember how to sequence the different parts. That one. Anyway, let's just play a little bit of the opening just to get them more or less. It's entirely up to you how much you teach, yes. But you just definitely don't want your students to play that. None of us are playing that, but we're slightly disagreeing on how much more or less to do. So, my turn, your turn. Ready, and. Great, let's keep going. So let's just make sure that the more or less that we agreed on then doesn't turn into... And that's the other one you need to decide on. Beautiful. So it's up to you how much of that you want to do and how much you want to not do, but I think it's very beautiful like that. So the colours, although I don't put the colours in all the way through book 3, are extremely useful for this piece because it's such a head wreck of memory.
Maisie told me days of the week.
Oh yeah?
So the tea days are the ones that are very similar.
Mm-hmm.
And then hump day, Wednesday. I've got hump day.
But what about dun, 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 dun.
That's Monday morning.
Oh, okay, it's not Monday. Dun, 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 dun. So that's like being asleep or something.
Yeah.
So,
I think she said, here comes Maisie running downstairs, what she have this morning for breakfast. Here comes Maisie running downstairs, what she have for her breakfast today. Monday morning she'll just have toast.
so it's Monday.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday. That's very cute.
It's going to find the rest of the words.
Well, I'm not a massive fan of actually having words for everything,
Yeah, yeah.
as you know. But I think
So either colour the sections you say.
yeah, I find the colours are useful because, for example, bar 24 is dark green, and then you have dark green ending, which is the descending third. Well, no, they both descend. It's the third that descends from the tune. So down, the one that goes down from the E is the dark green, and then the light green ending is the where you rise before you fall. The days of the week are very cute. Friday's a bit sad though, which is not how most people feel on Friday.
Well, it starts but then it gets the end of it.
I think that for me, I have given credits for this, I will say this with no shame. I have given credits for this piece helping the students to remember the start of each bit a little bit, because I feel a bit like this level of memory is something that can happen in review, and to keep them on it for an extra 3 weeks when they can play it beautifully but they just can't quite sequence the different sections is sort of unnecessary, frankly.
Just going back a bit, you said that so the bar 24 ending is dark green, and then the other ending is brown 16. Is that
It's 50.
what colour is that?
5, 6, 7. Well, I put them as light green. I just mean that you have the same. You've got the pictures of my books, haven't you?
Yeah.
Have we done book 3?
photograph of proof. I was taking a lot of photos out. Okay, so scan it.
I am going to properly scan them now that I've worked out how to get them from my scanner to my computer.
Media.
Oh no. Yeah. Martini got, yeah, so on the, yes, we did have them in WhatsApp.
Good. So there isn't any preview for this piece really, they just get going on it. The boxes that I have are halfway through 24 to halfway through 28. And the Friday section, if you want to call it that, so halfway through 72. I do 2 of those little phrases as one box at a time. So halfway through 72 to halfway through 76 is the first box, and that's a 10 box because it's hard with the G sharps and the F naturals all at once. And then the next 2 bars is a 5 box because you've still got tricky intonation, but it's not as hard. So more or less it's something that we are thinking about. Ed Quitman, I think, calls it the dia, which is just like a very good, you know, impression of the sound that it makes. So dia bowing. But obviously, what works for you. Okay, so the tick boxes. And again, because we didn't do teaching points, I'll remind you this morning, we didn't do teaching points, I'll remind you that I have always written into these books, tone and intonation as boxes. But if you have a student who just generally plays in tune, and you have a student who generally plays with good tone, you do not need to write it every single piece unless you feel like they are going to get extra motivation out of having it sort of recognise that they do those 2 things well. So tone and intonation, posture, that kind of basics. Boxes. D up bows, i.e. more or less. Memory. Dance style. And dynamics. And again with the dynamics, I'm quite relaxed about, well, as you know, I think I normally add dynamics in review, not in the first time they do it for credit. But for example, whenever I look at this, I'm like, oh yeah, it's got that stupid. After the fortissimo at the top of the second page, the tune is supposed to be piano and then mezzo forte, and that's the only time that it comes that way around. And I just think, if it were up to me, I wouldn't do that. So I don't really insist that the students do that. I see what they're trying to do with getting the contrast from fortissimo to piano, but I just think it's unnecessary. And I don't think I've ever heard it in 20-something years of teaching. Whereas, is a very nice little story, isn't it? About being nervous and then reassured, or, you know, whatever you want to make up about that.
Remember you saying to me years ago that trying to remember for the ritornello part what the dynamics are when they come in each time, because they're different. So it's mezzo and then piano and mezzo again and piano after the Wednesday, and then mezzo and then piano to forte at the end.
Well, that's what I was just saying. I just don't think that it's a big deal to get that right. It's not what Martini wrote. It's what someone else has decided to put in. So we can decide to
take it out.
Something I find is this is to do with articulation that I've had a quick on the there's two staccato dots there.
Yeah, rubbish, aren't they?
It's difficult to do, isn't it? Without
I wouldn't do it.
No.
I wouldn't do it. I think it's like we were
Yeah.
talking about with Gavotte and all the others. It's a brush stroke.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like I don't know why
I've
they
tried.
insist
I've
on
worked
putting all those-
at that and thought it doesn't. It just sounds quite
Sounds
strange.
crap. Yeah.
Doesn't sound right, really.
Is it an editor's choice of logical progression of upburst staccato and just keeping it rather than a musical decision?
I don't know. Let's not waste any time trying to work out why
No,
they've done it. We can just
unless
agree
you're-
that we think it's not something we're going to do.
Unless you've got sort of an off the string kind of stroke.
But then that wouldn't be staccato either.
But you wouldn't dance it that way.
No.
The Gavotte
So it's
would
more
come up
kind
and
of
be
brush,
straight
isn't it?
down. Don't.
Yeah.
It's not a skip step.
Just ignore it.
Oh, right.
It's a brush stroke. But thank you for reminding me. And again, the accents, like we were talking about before lunch. You know, you don't want to hear dee 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 dee, especially because why isn't there one on the F sharp? Ugh.
Yeah. Which
Dee
has
dee
the
dee
worst.
dee 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 dee, bum bum bum.
So accents are just a little bit of emphasis.
Yes.
Just, yeah.
I think that talking with your students about the memory is useful to think about, okay, which are the ways that you're going to remember this? Are we going to put colours in it? You're going to know which colour you're up to because you have a visual memory. Are you going to remember the first one is sad, Monday, dun, 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 and then the high one goes to high 3 first, and then to just to the F sharp second time. Sorry, yes, F sharp. How are you going to remember the Friday? Are you going to remember it by the little story about it? Are you going to remember it because you're nearly at the end and then you get something really tricky just to challenge you when you're feeling really exhausted? The middle section, are you going to remember, you know, it's really super simple and easy, like, hooray, we've got halfway through. You know, all of these different ways that you can help your students to remember the piece. And of course, listening and following the music, especially for the visual learners, in the practice will make a huge difference. Because when you have this on in the background, you just hear the piece and the tune. It does not, I don't think, help most children to sequence the different sections. It helps them know the tune really well, and it helps them know what else there is. But if you listen to it in the background and expect the memory to come from that, I think it would be an unusual child who will get those things from that.
It's hard to see
The only way I could do it was just to isolate the verses, and just sort of go through them one by, you know, like what's verse 3, what's verse 2, what's verse 5. That's it.
Yeah, that's another good way to do
do it
yeah.
otherwise.
Have you not got your book 3 here?
I have, yeah, but I'm looking at your markings rather than
Oh, right, okay.
from them in. So, I mean, for me, the whole thing with the memory, because you have this running tune repeating. When you're listening to it, you could be at any point within the book, or at any point. So your attention is distracted by any kind of sound and anything, where you suddenly come back to it. And like,
Exactly, you don't know where you are in the sequence. Exactly.
And there's all the other sections don't lead to another section. There's no sort of parallel, there's no arch over it.
Yeah.
To tell you where you're going to be in all of this. So it's there. There's almost a bit of symmetry within it. There's almost a bit.
Definitely.
And it's
There's
just
definitely symmetry.
There
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
So it's just finding what that symmetry is from, and just seeing if you can turn it into a butterfly that people know whether they're
Yeah.
second or second.
I think it's also helpful for the kids to know that this, this is, if they've ever been to a ceilidh or a barn dance, this is the sort of equivalent from that period that they just wanted to keep dancing. So they just have all these extra bits in between that they just kind of cycle through. It's.
I think also explaining the idea that this thing keeps recurring like an annoying commercial, that keeps coming back. You know what I mean?
We'll take that approach if you want to, maybe.
Poor Martini.
I think it's also really handy to do this piece in a book 2 group, because you can teach your book 2s all of that with no problem at all. I mean, that's not any more difficult than, well, certainly it's not more difficult than Gavotte. Yeah. So if you've got a book 2 to 3 group, this can be a really nice piece to work on, and then they can teach themselves or learn one of the extra verses as they like.
Actually, if they've used the rate, they can do this.
Yeah. It's very much, in the spirit of what we had at the beginning of book 2, which is like, you've got through the hump at the end of book 1, so have something that's not too challenging. And this is definitely the same kind of thing, apart from the memory. And then, of course, minuet is a similar thing again, because you've already done the minuet and you've just got the minor, and it's really got one difficult bar in it. The shifting's quite tricky in the minuet, but anyway. So, are there any questions about Gavotte?
Will you talk to them about the keys of the verses?
I personally don't. I do talk about how what is pink in my book, is a very different sound and change of key, and brings them back to something that then they can get to the end.
So
In the right key, but I don't go through the keys of each one. You can if you want.
So when you're just with the 2 up bows, dum bum bum, again, it's a brush stroke, is it, starting sort of in upper half?
I don't think it's really a brush stroke. I think of a brush stroke as being repeated faster notes. I think it's very much like your minuets in book 1.
Yeah.
Rather than like if it's a brush stroke, it's not going to be in.
No.
So but it's 2 scoops basically,
Okay.
and then a long scoop, which is sort of more like a tick as well. So the more or less comes through.
2 scoops.
2 scoops and a tick.
Your annoying advert.
Right.
I'm going to drag
Yes.
scoops.
Good. So 5 minutes until Birdie is here.